Elvis dropped the microphone. The sound echoed through the Vegas arena like a gunshot. 10,000 people watched in stunned silence as the king of rock and roll fell to his knees, clutching a small piece of paper. The boy who had handed it to him stood frozen on stage, not understanding why the man in the white jumpsuit was suddenly crying like his world had just ended. What could a 5-year-old possibly write that would break the heart of the most famous man on earth? The International Hotel in Las Vegas, August 15, 1973. Elvis was 40 minutes into his midnight show, sweat glistening under the stage lights, his voice pouring out, "Love Me Tender," to a crowd that hung on every note. This was his kingdom, the stage where he could forget everything else, where the pain, the pills, and the loneliness couldn't reach him. But tonight something was different. In the front row sat Margaret Collins, clutching her 5-year-old son Tommy's hand so tight her knuckles were white. She'd saved for 8 months, working double shifts at the diner, just to afford these seats. Tonight wasn't about her, it was about Tommy. It was about giving her boy one perfect memory before. She couldn't finish that thought. Not here. Not tonight. Tommy had been asking about Elvis for weeks. Ever since the diagnosis, ever since the doctors started using words like terminal and months, not years, Tommy had become obsessed with the man on the radio who sang about hound dogs and blue suede shoes. Margaret didn't understand it, but she understood hope. And if Elvis Presley could give her dying son even one moment of pure joy, she'd mortgage her soul to make it happen. But what neither Margaret nor Tommy knew was that Elvis was fighting his own demons that night. His marriage was crumbling, his health was deteriorating, and the weight of being everyone's hero was crushing him. He was about to discover that sometimes, healing comes from the most unexpected places. Elvis moved through his setlist with mechanical precision. Don't Be Cruel, Heartbreak Hotel, Hound Dog, the hits that had made him a legend. But his heart wasn't in it tonight. He was going through the motions, counting down the songs until he could retreat to his suite and the chemical peace that waited there. Then, during a brief pause between songs, he noticed the boy. Tommy was different from the screaming teenagers and swooning women who usually filled his audience. The child wasn't even watching the show, he was writing something on a piece of paper, his tiny tongue sticking out in concentration. Margaret kept glancing between her son and Elvis, tears streaming down her face. Elvis had developed an instinct for recognizing pain over the years. Maybe it was his own suffering that made him sensitive to it in others. Or maybe it was just the way a performer learns to read a room. But something about this mother and child called to him. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elvis said, his voice carrying that familiar drawl that could make 10,000 people fall silent with a whisper. "I see a young man in the front row there who looks like he's got something important to say." The crowd turned to look. Tommy looked up from his paper, eyes wide with terror and excitement. "What's your name, son?" Elvis asked, walking to the edge of the stage. Tommy's voice was barely audible over the sound system. "Tommy Collins." "Well, Tommy Collins, what are you writing there?" The boy looked at his mother, who nodded through her tears. Tommy stood up on his chair, folded the paper carefully, and held it out toward the stage. Elvis felt something he hadn't felt in years: genuine curiosity. This wasn't fan mail or a phone number scrawled on a napkin. This was something else entirely. Something that would change everything. Elvis knelt down at the edge of the stage and took the paper from Tommy's small hands. The arena held its breath. Even the band stopped tuning their instruments. In all his years of performing, Elvis had never stopped a show to read a note from a fan. "Should I read this out loud, Tommy?" Elvis asked. The boy shook his head quickly. "It's just for you." Elvis unfolded the paper. The handwriting was shaky, the kind that comes from a child who's still learning to form letters. But the words were clear enough. "Dear Elvis, my mommy says I'm going to heaven soon. Can you sing Happy Birthday to Jesus when I get there? I'm scared to go alone. Love, Tommy. P.S. Mommy cries when she thinks I'm sleeping." Elvis read the note once. Then twice. Then a third time, as if the words might change, as if he might have misunderstood. But there was no misunderstanding the innocence in those lines, the simple faith of a child facing the unthinkable. The paper began to shake in Elvis's hands. The crowd sensed something was happening, but they couldn't see what was written on that small piece of paper. They could only watch as their larger-than-life hero seemed to crumble before their eyes. Elvis looked at Tommy, really looked at him, and saw what he'd missed before. The pale skin that spoke of too many hospital visits. The careful way Margaret held him, as if he might break. The old soul's sadness in a 5-year-old's eyes. And then it happened. The moment that would haunt and heal Elvis Presley for the rest of his life. Elvis fell to his knees right there on the stage. The note fluttered from his hands as his shoulders began to shake. 10,000 people watched in stunned silence as the king of rock and roll broke down completely, sobbing like a child. The arena erupted in confused murmurs. Security started moving toward the stage. Band members exchanged worried glances. But Margaret Collins understood. She'd seen that same look of helpless rage against an unfair universe in her own mirror every morning for months. Elvis couldn't speak. Couldn't sing. Couldn't do anything but kneel there and feel the weight of every injustice in the world crushing down on him. Here was this perfect little boy, full of love and innocence, asking him to sing to Jesus. And Elvis who had everything, who was supposedly blessed beyond measure. Elvis felt like a fraud. Tommy, seeing his hero in distress, did something that no one expected. He climbed up onto the stage. Security moved to stop him, but Margaret called out, "Let him go. Please." Tommy walked over to where Elvis knelt and, without hesitation, wrapped his small arms around the man's neck. "It's okay," Tommy whispered, loud enough for the microphones to pick up. "Mommy says Jesus likes music. Maybe we can sing together when I get there." Subscribe and comment now because what happens next will absolutely amaze you. Elvis lifted his head, tears streaming down his face, and looked into the eyes of this extraordinary child. In that moment, he saw something he'd lost years ago: pure, uncomplicated love. Not love for Elvis Presley the star, but love for Elvis the human being who was hurting. "Tommy," Elvis said, his voice hoarse with emotion, "would you like to sing something with me right now?" The boy nodded eagerly. Elvis stood up, lifting Tommy in his arms, and walked to the center of the stage. The crowd was completely silent now, sensing they were witnessing something sacred. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elvis said, his voice steadier now, "this is my friend Tommy Collins, and he's going to help me with a special song." He set Tommy down beside him and knelt to the boy's level. "What's your favorite song, Tommy?" "Amazing Grace," Tommy said without hesitation. "Mommy sings it when I can't sleep." Elvis nodded, understanding. He'd sung that song at his mother's funeral. He knew its power to heal and comfort. "Musicians," Elvis called to his band. "Amazing Grace in the key of G." What happened next defied every expectation of a Vegas show. Elvis began to sing, but not in his usual powerful, commanding voice. This was different, gentle, vulnerable, almost prayer-like. Tommy joined in with his small voice, and somehow, impossibly, it was perfect. "Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound, that saved a wretch like me." But the real miracle was still coming. Because what Tommy did next would change Elvis Presley forever and create a moment that would outlive them both. As they sang, Tommy reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. It was a toy car, a little red Cadillac, one smooth from years of being carried everywhere. He held it out to Elvis. "This is for you," Tommy said. "So you'll remember me when I'm in heaven." Elvis took the tiny car with hands that were shaking again. It was warm from being in Tommy's pocket, and one of the doors was held on with tape. It was the most precious gift he'd ever received. "I'll keep this forever," Elvis promised, and he meant it. They finished the song together, and by the time they reached "Was blind but now I see," there wasn't a dry eye in the arena. The audience was singing along now, 10,000 voices joining this unlikely duet between a dying child and a broken superstar. When the song ended, Elvis hugged Tommy tight and whispered something in his ear that only the boy could hear. Tommy nodded solemnly, then waved to the crowd like he'd been performing his whole life. Elvis walked Tommy back to his mother, who was sobbing so hard she could barely stand. He knelt down beside her seat and took her hand. "Margaret," he said. Somehow he knew her name without being told. "Tommy is going to be okay. He's going to sing with the angels, and they're going to love him just like we do." Then Elvis did something unprecedented. He took off his signature ring, the one with the lightning bolt that he never removed, and pressed it into Margaret's palm. "For when you miss him," he said simply. The aftermath of that night would ripple through both their lives in ways neither could have imagined. Elvis finished the show, but it was different. Every song was sung with new purpose, new meaning. The audience could feel it. They'd witnessed something transformational. After the show, Elvis sat in his dressing room, holding Tommy's red Cadillac. His manager, Colonel Parker, was furious about the unprofessional display. But Elvis didn't care. For the first time in years, he felt connected to something real. He made 2 phone calls that night. The first was to his own father, telling him he loved him. The second was to St. Jude Children's Hospital, arranging for the largest donation in the hospital's history. Tommy Collins lived for 6 more months. During that time, Elvis visited him twice, always bringing his guitar, always ready to sing. They recorded Amazing Grace together in Tommy's hospital room, a recording that Elvis kept private for the rest of his life. When Tommy passed away on February 14, 1974, Elvis performed a private concert at his funeral. He sang Amazing Grace one last time for his friend, and when he was done, he placed the red Cadillac on Tommy's casket. Margaret Collins kept Elvis's ring for the rest of her life. When she died in 2019, she was buried wearing it, and her will specified that it should stay with her until I can give it back to the man who taught my son that love is the only thing that really matters. Share this story and subscribe. Make this moment unforgettable, just like Tommy made it for Elvis. The red Cadillac was returned to Elvis's estate after Tommy's funeral, but Elvis couldn't bear to look at it. He had it bronzed and placed on his piano at Graceland, where it remained until his own death in 1977. Visitors to Graceland today can still see that small bronze car. The placard beside it reads, "In memory of Tommy Collins, who taught the king that true royalty comes from serving others." But the real monument to that night isn't at Graceland. It's in the countless children who have been helped by the Tommy Collins Foundation, which Elvis quietly established and funded for the rest of his life. It's in the pediatric wing of Memphis Children's Hospital that bears Tommy's name. It's in the change that one small boy made in the heart of a man who thought he was beyond saving. Elvis often said in interviews after that night that Tommy Collins saved his life. When asked what he meant, he would just smile and touch his shirt pocket, where he kept a photograph of him and Tommy singing together on stage. Sometimes, Elvis would say, "The smallest angels have the biggest wings." That photograph was found in Elvis's shirt pocket when he died. On the back, in his handwriting, were the words Tommy had whispered to him that night on stage. "Thank you for promising to sing to Jesus for me." Elvis Presley kept that promise. And somewhere in heaven, a little boy with a red Cadillac is still singing along. The impact of that night went far beyond what anyone could have imagined. 3 months after Tommy's funeral, Elvis received a letter that would floor him once again. It was from Dr. Sarah Mitchell, Tommy's oncologist at Memphis Children's Hospital. "Mr. Presley," the letter began, "I felt you should know that Tommy Collins spoke about you every single day until he passed. But more importantly, his story has inspired something miraculous. Word of your kindness has spread through our hospital, and we've had 17 families reach out, asking if their children could meet you. These are children who have given up hope, who won't eat, won't speak, won't fight anymore. But when they heard about Tommy and his red Cadillac, something changed in their eyes." Elvis read that letter sitting in his Graceland study, Tommy's bronzed car catching the afternoon light on his piano. He wept again, but these were different tears. These were tears of purpose. Within a week, Elvis had established what would become his most guarded secret: the Cadillac visits. Every month, he would quietly slip into Memphis Children's Hospital, bringing his guitar and a collection of small toy cars. No cameras, no publicity, no Colonel Parker orchestrating the event for maximum exposure. Just Elvis and children who needed to believe in magic. The hospital staff called him Mr. Smith during these visits, maintaining the pretense even though every child knew exactly who was sitting beside their bed, singing lullabies and listening to their dreams. Elvis would spend hours there, sometimes staying well past midnight when a particularly sick child couldn't sleep. Years later, when reporters asked Elvis about his greatest achievement, he never mentioned his gold records or sold-out shows. He would simply say, "I learned to sing to angels," and leave it at that. Only those closest to him knew he was talking about the children who taught him that fame without compassion was just noise, and that sometimes the smallest voices carry the most important songs.